What is up, everyone? Dan the Card Man back again. Today we're talking through a few issues, the first of which is going to be what appears to be a fairly egregious mistake by PSA once again. It looks like they've sent somebody the wrong card, and it looks like something happened mid-process that meant this customer's card got lost, or at least it appears to be. We'll then also touch on some ways in which these companies like PSA, like these manufacturers, could uplift their process. Because I work in external audit, some of you guys have asked me in the past, okay, Daniel, what would you do at PSA to make sure mistakes don't happen? I'll give some examples on how these businesses could improve their process to be stronger overall. So stay tuned for that as well. Now, like I just touched on, Mike from Bench Clear Media sent in some cards. He sent in 9 cards via the economy service just for his PC collection, right? Is my understanding. And he did say that he sent one of the cards, actually, is the one that was missing in the end, was a tie-dyed Trey Lance die cut out of 25, okay? And essentially what he explains in this process is that once the cards were received by PSA, there was no issue. All the cards are listed as being correct, as it being entered into the process. The system still said it was his tie-dye card. Basically, midway through that process, when it said the cards were ready to be graded or finalized, he noticed that his tie-dye prism now said it was an optic blue hyper of Trey Lance, which is fairly strange when you think about it, right? Now, often what happens is, in instances like this, it's the mailman or somebody at the very start of the process that has somehow stolen this individual's cards. You see that happen a lot with group submitters. I shouldn't say it a lot. It happens every now and then, okay? So this was my first thought. Maybe it got stolen. But as Mike does explain, the cards had no issues when they were accepted by PSA. If the card had been stolen or lost prior to getting to PSA, when they checked his order matched his submission, right? Because they do that to check that you've submitted under the right threshold, you've submitted via the right, so you don't get upcharged essentially. They would have seen that he submitted a hyper blue or a blue hyper instead of his tie-dye die cut out of 25, right? They would have flagged that straight away, but they didn't. They said there was no issue. So they processed it, and then all of a sudden he's got a blue hyper. And as he explains in his video, I think you guys should check it out. I'm not sure if I already mentioned that. I'll put a link down below as I always do. He basically explains that yes, he got a different card. He tried to contact them before the cards got shipped. They said there was no issue. The card in question matched the card in his submission form, which he's saying is incorrect. He basically had a lot of back and forth with their customer support center. They found it really, really hard to get in touch with a person. There's basically a really, really long queue that essentially runs for the whole day. You need to call immediately at 7 a.m. It just seems like a bit of a shit show, again, from PSA, right? There's all these things, and it's just a very strange situation. Like, I'm really curious to understand what has occurred here. Because my understanding with their grading process, right, was that your cards as a customer all graded together, right? It's not like I've got this Cliff Hagan over here, this NT auto on-card auto Hall of Famer, and I send it in with this Tim Hardaway Jr. Select 1314. Both of these go to the same grader, right? My order stays together the whole time. That's my understanding of the process. Some of you might say, well, maybe they go to different people, each individual card. That would be really, really strange. But if that was the case, that might explain how one card could go missing, right? Given that they more than likely stay together, how could this card have disappeared? Has somebody out at PSA pocketed it? I would be surprised if that was the case, but what does that mean? Has the card been stolen? Did the card get damaged and they replaced it with something else? Like, all these kinds of things. Like, you would think if the card was damaged and replaced or something along those lines, PSA would have told the guy. They would have kept that track somewhere. It just seems very weird. So I'm curious to see whether Mike's going to give an update a little bit later on, as in tomorrow night, or like tomorrow night Australian time, as in tomorrow US time. I'm very curious to see what's going to happen next, because that's just so strange. And if you guys have experienced something like that yourself, please let me know down in the comments below, because when I've seen things like this happen in the past, it's usually hanky-panky where things are stolen by the mailman or the person in question is lying about it, right? Because some people try and pull the wool over PSA's eyes. I don't think Mike's lying in this instance. He's got no reason to lie. What's he going to lie about a tie-dye cut out of 25, right? Of Trey Lance. Like, who cares, really? Come on. It's not the most expensive card in the world. Like, yes, I'm sure he really likes that card, so I didn't mean to offend him by saying that. But you get what I'm trying to say. Like, what would be his motive here, other than trying to create content to lie about this, right? Because PSA could embarrass this guy very, very quickly if he is lying. So I don't think he is. But that's just very weird, right? How does a card just disappear mid-process and then all of a sudden it gets updated as a different card in the system out at PSA that doesn't match the original submission that PSA didn't question when they received the cards in the first place? Because if the card, like, had he actually documented that he sent in the tie-dye that he does show on camera, and he actually sent in the hyper blue, that's the first thing PSA would have said. This card doesn't match, guy. What do you want to do? All right. Very, very strange. Let me know your thoughts on this down in the comments below, and please check out his video, because He goes in a bit more detail than some of the things I covered myself. I know he spoke about how PSA's customer support center is quite poor. Again, he does highlight that, you have to call at 7 a.m. and they're busy for the whole day. I'm curious to understand how many support staff PSA actually have. Now, a few people in the comments of his video say, you know what, this is really bad from PSA. How many issues do PSA have for them to have that many people calling them? Just from what I know from customer support centers, right? Because I audit companies, right? And a lot of these companies have customer support centers. And what they often do is imply that they're getting more calls than what they actually are. So maybe PSA is just funneling things down into a funnel. Obviously, that's where you funnel things. So maybe they're not getting as many calls as they actually are. But if they are, that's pretty alarming, right? That no matter what time of day you call, you literally have to call first thing in the morning in order to get in that queue. It's pretty shocking. I know I'm rambling now, but I hope you guys do get the point. And please let me know, like I said, if you've experienced something like this before, because this is a crazy error from PSA. Like, did the card get stolen? Did it get damaged? Did it get lost? Like, what's going on? It's just very, very strange. I've not heard of this happening before out at PSA. I've heard of them sending cards to the wrong customer, which turned out to be the customers both sharing the same first name and last name. But this seems very strange. Like, is there a loophole within their process? Is somebody stealing cards? How many other times has this happened? How many times has this happened where maybe they've just replaced the card you sent in and they've kept that for themselves? Those are tinfoil hat things, but guys, when you start seeing things like this, those are the questions you need to start asking because they all speak to the same problem. That's how you develop your risk appetite. That's how you assess the robustness of a process. I've explained before, I work in external audit, right? So I look at business processes all the time. And what I'm about to explain to you is a good step in that, right? The reason why you look at this error and then you start asking yourself, okay, what else could go wrong within this process? That's how you develop and that's how you understand if a business process is actually strong enough. So the first thing I do when I go to a big bank, right? And some of you guys might be a bit bored of this, but you need to listen because it'll help you understand how these companies can be better, okay? The first thing you do is you sit down with the person, like let's say I'm looking at a mortgage lending process, right? I want to understand all the risks within that process. I want to understand all the things that that bank has in place to make sure mistakes don't happen to a material nature, okay? You need to understand, okay, what are the controls? What are the systems? And then you do something that is a bit of assessment on these things called what could go wrongs, right? So you sit down in the process and you would say, okay, well, what would happen if this occurred? What do you have in place to make sure that nobody's stealing this money? From a PSA perspective, it would be, what do you have in place to make sure that nobody steals that card? What do you have in place to make sure that nobody replaces that card? What do you have in place to make sure that reviews are consistent? What do you have in place to make sure that reviews are reviewed? All these sorts of things. These things are questions you need to ask. And that's why I said, when you see something like this and you put on that little tinfoil hat that some people like to say, you start asking all these other questions because that helps you understand how robust their process actually is. And that's very, very key. So when you say these things, it's not just saying them for the sake of saying them. It's helping you understand how robust their risk appetite is, how robust their process is. And like I said at the very start, I'm going to talk through a couple of instances, right? Like I'm fairly certain that PSA implement what is known as a 4-eye check within like business processes, right? The 4-eye check being that two people look at the same thing independently, right? So you've got somebody that's grading a card. I come in and grade it. The second person then grades the same card. They don't know what grade I've given that card. And then if there's a big deviation between the two grades that each of us have given, because we input, our grades when we're done in the system independently, a third person, which is known as a 6-eye check, because you've got 6 pairs of eyes or 3 pairs of eyes make 6, they do a determination themselves to be the deciding factor, right? You basically get a majority rules happening. So from what I understand, that's PSA's key process. And if that's the only thing they've got from a grading perspective, they could immediately improve that quite a lot by just implementing reviews of reviews. And that could be something along the lines of, let's say, like I grade 100 cards a week, right? I'm grade 1, somebody else is grade 2. Grade 2 always changes, not always the same two people looking at the same cards. So let's say I go through those 100 cards and me, because I'm quite inexperienced, the person that I'm working with or not working with, the other grader that's working independently from me is also inexperienced or not as experienced as they probably should be. We consistently grade the same grades. So these cards never meet the 6-eye check, right? They never get to that point where they need that threshold of the third person coming in to look, okay? Which, is probably considered good on face value. PSA might say that's a good job because our guys are consistent. The problem is, if both of those grades are wrong, then you're almost shit out of luck, right? So the way you'd make that process a little bit more robust is you'd say, okay, well, you know what? If our guys are grading, 100 cards a week, we want a 5% review rate, okay? So that would mean that every individual, for 5% of those 100 cards, it'd be 5 cards, or 5 orders, whatever you want to call it, however they want to do it, gets reviewed by the 6-eye check, regardless of whether there's a deviation between grader 1 and grader 2. Like, okay, there are complications now from implementing something like that. There's more time, it's going to cost more money, but if you do have instances of individuals that are grading things incorrectly. That review factor was going to do two things. It's either going to help and make sure that the people that are making these kinds of mistakes are getting picked up on, right? But then also they're going to learn. So you've got two elements that's going to immediately improve your business process. And those things might already be in place at PSA, okay? And like I said at the start, I'm probably going to talk through a couple of these instances. It's obviously hard for me to comment directly on improvements and things like that because I don't know the process in detail. But those are the things you would look for to try and improve. You know, there are other elements where you've got, like I've touched on, having like proper automation within the system around, you know, tracking specific customers, because we've also seen instances where customers get, you know, the wrong order shipped, right? It's just a few things like that that I think they could go a long way. And it goes to like not just like the grading process, because like in this instance that Mike explained from Bench Clear Media, right? He sent in the correct card. The label he sent in matched that card. All of a sudden, midway through the process, that card no longer matched that label. So did the card get stolen? Did PSA's review process on, you know, receiving the submission mess up, right? Did the person not notice it from the very get-go? That would have implied whether the card was stolen before it got to them, right? There's all these things, there's all these processes and policies you could put in place to make the process more robust. And again, I've said this before, without knowing the detail myself, I genuinely think, you know, PSA's process is robust, it is strong, but I don't think it's strong enough for the volume that they're currently pumping out, which means it's not good enough, right? Which means it's not robust enough. Because if they go back to doing, you know, 10,000 cards a week or 100,000 cards a month, right? If they go back to what it was pre-boom, maybe their controls and their policies were strong. Maybe they had enough to cover these kinds of mistakes. But it looks as though their process and their volume has blown up astronomically, but they haven't uplifted their process to match the level of risk they've now got by processing that many cards. So I'm curious to see what's actually happened in this situation. I know I rambled again. I feel like I say that all the time, so I do apologize. It's almost like a watch your space kind of thing. Let's just see what happens, because this is just a very, very shocking mistake. I don't understand where within their process this could have occurred if it wasn't stolen, right? Unless somebody else somehow got their orders mixed up with this guy's and it just so happened to be a Trey Lance. That's just so odd, right? Like, it's just very odd. And if that was a mistake that could occur, as in the cards got mixed up and then somebody lost your card, so they just replaced it in the system, again, that speaks to a very, very poor business process. So I'm hoping, you know, Nat Turner comes out and says something. I very much doubt that. PSA need to comment on this. Bench Clear Media, they're not a small person on the internet, right? They've got a big following. So I'm curious to see what essentially comes of this. Now, that's sort of it for those two topics. If I did miss anything, let me know down in the comments below. If you do know any other updates or you do know some things that I should be aware of, please also list those down below. Like I said, this is the kind of stuff I like to flag on the channel, because these questions, they basically can't go unnoticed or undiscussed, if that's a word, because the more we talk about it, the more pressure we put on these pillars of the hobby to actually make a difference to how they, you know, support us as customers. They're taking us for granted. I've said this consistently for the last 2 years. So many people within this hobby are so quick to throw money at things. They're so quick to ignore issues. You know, eventually these businesses are going to realize that they're probably going to take that one step too far, and it's going to let themselves down because customers are going to turn away. We're almost already seeing that with Panini, where even the average person is starting to get frustrated with their QC and with their, you know, lack of player worn memorabilia and all this other sort of stuff, right? These things, you know, eventually aggregate and snowball into something that could become a big problem for their business, these businesses. So they need to start, you know, showing some transparency, showing some open dialogue, doing things to get out of their comfort zones to show us as customers that they do care. So I think that's it for this topic. So just let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I really do appreciate all your support. Things are getting pretty exciting with some of the things happening within the hobby. It looks like we're making some traction with some of the things we are talking about, which is fantastic. I do appreciate your support, so please drop me a like and a follow if you did enjoy the video. As always, I love having a chat with you all, so leave a comment as well and we can have a chat. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.